When most people look at this piece of concept art that was released around a month ago for the then upcoming game Deus Ex Mankind Divided, it's pretty obvious that it is supposed to show the struggle between these two groups. It shows just how far the split between augmented humans and natural humans, if you will, has gone in the universe of Deus Ex Mankind Divided. It tells part of the story. However, to some, the focus was a little bit different. Some people who I suppose have nothing better to do decided to focus instead on a sign, a banner, that was featured by one of these groups in this concept art. The banner reads quite simply, Aug's Lives Matter. For those of you unaware of the lore of Deus Ex or the setting, Augs is short for augmented, which refers to human beings who have augmented limbs or body parts. Cyborgs, in essence. In different degrees, of course. Some more than others. I saw these articles when they first emerged, around the same time. There was a series of tweets done, articles made on different sites, PC Gamer, let me see, the Polygon one, there was Mary Sue, fucking Mary Sue, CNC, I believe, a whole bunch of them. We'll take a look at a few as we go along. And of course, Feminist Frequency had to dabble into the Deus Ex Mankind Black Lives Matter appropriation, which is ultimately one of the points of this video. The idea that Deus Ex Mankind Divided appropriated Black Lives Matter as a movement. And, well, let's just progress. Black Lives Matter is, gosh, what's the most charitable way to describe Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter is a bully organization of frustrated, spoiled millennials and people looking for an anger outlet. It's a borderline terrorist organization that often spews hateful rhetoric and inspires murder on police officers. I have absolutely no love for Black Lives Matter. They are an awful organization. I have no time and no patience for groups of individuals who want to blame all the problems that they think they may or may not be facing on some boogeyman called white supremacy or systematic racism, because they think it's much easier to blame something else for your problems instead of maybe the fact that, well, blacks in this country commit an insanely high amount of crime. That 73% of blacks are born out of wedlock. Blacks only graduate from high school at a rate of 69% nationwide. The fact that 93% of black homicide victims are killed by other blacks. The fact that 40% of cop killers are black, despite black males being 6.6% of the United States population. But I suppose it's much easier to blame systematic racism or the police or white supremacy or just some nebulous boogeyman out there in the distance floating around invisible yet ever-present instead of addressing the problems that face your own community. And let's not forget that the spiritual inspiration for the Black Lives Matter movement was none other than Assata Shakur, who was on the FBI's most wanted list. A former Black Panther Party member and Black Liberation Army member. But when terrorists and murders of this ilk are the inspiration for your movement, then maybe holding signs that say Assata taught me how to fight might help to explain the link between Black Lives Matter and violence. So as you can see, I am no friend of Black Lives Matter, by any stretch of the imagination, and I have good reason not to be. So you're going to have to forgive me if my heart doesn't bleed whenever I learn that the Black Lives Matter movement and its sympathizers, they just get their feels hurt. Especially by something so trivial as concept art for a video game. We'll take a look at mostly 2 articles of them all that I found to be the most ridiculous. One of them coming from PC Gamer and the other coming from the Mary Sue. The article proceeds thus. Eidos Montreal released a pile of new concept art for Deus Ex Mankind Divided today, designed to showcase the appearance of some of the major cities around the globe in the game's unhappy near future. The gallery includes shots of Barcelona, Berlin, Cologne, London, Paris, Rio, and several others, but it's the Moscow image which has caused controversy, specifically the presence in it of an Aug's Lives Matter banner held by protesters. That, of course, is a reference to Black Lives Matter, the highly charged political movement protesting the systematic racism and abuse faced by African Americans. Oh, Andy. The negative response to the adaptation of the slogan, albeit in a futuristic setting, is that Eidos Montreal and publisher Square Enix are borrowing the image too lightly, and being tone deaf to real-world issues. Here's a sample of some of the criticism. The article then shows some tweets by Austin Walker. If you haven't heard of him, you're not missing much. Austin Walker used to work for Giant Bomb, where he wrote wonderful articles like On The Witcher 3, Race and Historicity, which, when summed up, basically come down to this game, written by a Polish author, developed by a Polish company, based on Polish literature, based on Polish folklore, doesn't have enough ethnic minorities in it. He writes, The Witcher is not a pure tapestry of Slavic mythology. It includes creatures and figures from many other world mythologies, like the Jinn, and it even has an analog for the Middle East, Africa, and/or South Asia, and Zerrikania. It's just that Zerrikania exists neatly off the map, where its presence can be felt but its people remain absent. Geralt will use the bombs that were designed there, but rarely encounter actual Zerrikanians. The game even splashes in a sort of tongue-in-cheek Orientalist discourse around Zerrikania that always makes me smile. These northern folks with their love of the exotic, I swear. Holy shit, websites are actually hiring people like this to write articles for them. I'll probably address this verbal diarrhea of an article later though, because I want to get back to Black Lives Matter and Deus Ex. But if I could sum it all up, I think this Reddit comment about the article does it fairly well. Again, I see the argument. Put them in because why not? Because it wasn't in the source material and doesn't fit with the setting of the game. Racist! Of course, Austin Walker, for somebody who gets paid to write articles and is a journalist of sorts, still seems to have some, conflict of interest issues. And Mr. Walker is the kind of racist who is very subtle because he'll often change his position once he knows the color of the person that he's potentially criticizing. In any event, the next person who's lambasting the Augs Lives Matter and the Black Lives Matter parallel that's in Deus Ex is Tariq Musa, who apparently thinks that women are so incapable of taking care of themselves and need special treatment that they deserve to be verified on Twitter. Soft bigotry of low expectations much, Tariq. As you can see, the people who are criticizing Augs Lives Matter in concept art for a video game are people who already seem to be extremely sympathetic for all the wrong things. These are the kind of people who go out and look for stuff to be offended by and have absolutely no issue defending organizations like Black Lives Matter or their imagined problems and struggles. Another critic who is lambasting Deus Ex Mankind Divided for a sign in a piece of concept art, because I guess that bothers adults, is resident BioWare racist Manveer Hire, whatever. I've tweeted about him in the past, and there have been a lot of stories about him and the things he said and the things he's proud to tweet out. Indeed, it doesn't take but a second to go through the things that he says and see that, well, we can see where his leanings lie. I mean, white supremacy has always been, it's a huge problem in the country with the black president, I've always said. This article from Heat Street, Mass Effect designer Manveer hates white people and wants the world to know, that isn't a very misleading title at all. It lists a lot of the tweets that he says, and some of them are fairly shocking and appalling with how bold he is in his racism. The level of brashness and bravado that he states his anti-white sentiment is, well, it's kind of shocking, borderline refreshing with at least how much he wears it on his sleeve. In this last tweet here I'm going to show, some people think America's pastime is baseball, but it's actually protecting white fragility. Speaking of white fragility, Manveer, is that why you blocked me on Twitter? Because of white fragility? Because you're such a fucking pussy? You're going to be the one to talk about how fragile white people's feelings are, and you're the one who blocks others who call you out. The Polygon article that I showed details the exchange of tweets and words between Andre Vu, the global executive brand director of the company, and Manveer whatever. This is of course awkward for Manveer because since Andre Vu is not white, he can't simply use his anti-white racism against him. Moving on though. Back to the PC Gamer article, it's possible that Mankind Divided will contribute meaningfully to the conversation about entrenched racism and the real-world violence it drives. But history tells us that's far from a given. On the one hand, gamers have fought a long-running battle for their medium to be taken seriously, and from that perspective, difficult subject matter shouldn't be off-limits. However, if developers treat raw, real-life issues ham-fistedly, they should expect the same criticisms that films and books receive. I don't exactly see how this is ham-fisted. Whatever, Andy, if that's what words you want to use. And then the editor-in-chief in the comments section said, I don't think we're describing it as ham-fisted, which is weird because that's the word you used. In any event, the criticism that seems to be levied at this is that it's insensitive to real-world issues, or that it's appropriating a movement that exists in real life for the purposes of promotion in a video game. It doesn't do the movement justice, critics of this thing say. And the fact that there are critics of a piece of concept art is, I mean, it's dumb, but it's indicative of the kind of people that we deal with nowadays. Let's take a look here at some comments that do this justice. The funny thing is that if the universe of Deus Ex was real, Aug's Lives Matter would probably exist as a movement. Humans have a tendency to mirror historical movements and initiatives over and over again. So not only is this not offensive, it's very accurate within its context. But again, these kinds of people don't look at context. They don't see things from any other angle than it's racist, it's not inclusive, it's not properly representing something, it's appropriating something else. The next comment, let's not be morons and look at this logically. If MD, Mankind Divided, exists in a possible future of our own world, why the hell not? I imagine future political movements would be happy to use the language of previous movements to draw comparison to their own struggles and grievances. The biggest difference, though, as this comment here sums up perfectly, the difference between AUGs and Deus Ex and real-life Black Lives Matter supporters is that AUGs are actually an oppressed class. If you haven't caught on to it yet, I'm not buying this Black Lives Matter bullshit about how blacks are systematically oppressed on literal, actual political levels in this country. Don't buy it for a second. Do not buy it. Absolutely not. And you are noticing here probably, I'm using a lot of comments to put forth these ideas. One, comments are a lot of the times really good on this website. I really like the commentary that is often done on the articles on this website. There's some smart cookies out there, and they don't put up with stupid bullshit. There's a lot of very pro-consumer, pro-community gamers who exist on PC Gamer as a website. And I often refer to their commentary if I feel that it's well-deserved of being called out and signal boosted. So Andy Chalk, moderator, writer of this article, says, I don't think appreciating it as a form of art and demanding exemption from criticism as art are ideas that can successfully coexist if you want to be taken seriously. I think your definition of gamers as a single, all-encompassing we really holds water either. What I think Andy is saying here is that people will defend this a lot of the time by saying you should appreciate it as a form of art and that you should exempt this from criticism because it is art. I don't recall seeing anyone who said that, though there are a lot of people who are saying you need to grow some skin, you fairy, oversensitive loser. Smiles Madness responded to this very well, I think. It's not the criticism people are bothered by, for the most part, I think. It's the censorship. People think that the criticism is stupid, it's unwarranted, and the people who criticize something as trivially as this are way oversensitive. I'm bothered by that because I share a species as the fools who criticize stuff like this. But when Smiles is talking about censorship, he has a very good point. He goes on, we've seen fanatics get up in arms about nonsense, pressuring censorship of stuff they can't handle. So your argument is idiotic. You would be okay if a small, loud group of fanatics went around yelling at people to censor paintings by smearing shit on them, then get their way because they yelled loud enough on social media. When we look at people like Tariq, when we look at people like Manveer, like Austin, when we look at all the loud and outspoken critics of something that is so trivial like this, something that bothers them on a deep personal level, something that hits them to their overly sensitive social justice warrior core, Let us consider, what if these people had a dictatorial level of power over what gets to stay and what gets to go in the process of creative freedom for video games like Deus Ex? So when you have people like Manveer who go out and publicly make tweets that say the real terrorists are already on American soil and they are white, right? Someone who is apologetically racist. Imagine if these people had complete and total creative freedom on the games they're working on. In Manveer's case, Mass Effect Andromeda. What if he had the final say in what stayed in the game and what was removed in the direction of this game? Now, BioWare games often tackle or bring up social issues, just like Deus Ex does in all of its installments. It's one of the greatest parts of the game. What if he was able to control the narrative within the game? Let's say Deus Ex no longer had a neutral, middle-of-the-road approach and let you as a player decide. What if instead there was an extremely real, palpable, obvious direction that the game was steering you towards that fit his anti-white agenda? Do you think that people like Manveer would say, no, 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 guys, we have to be fair. No, 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 it's up for everybody to decide what is or isn't in the game or what choices they make? Do you think he would be able to exercise that level of restraint and responsibility when this is the kind of rhetoric that he so unapologetically spews on the internet? Because I'm going to go with no. We've talked about the PC Gamer article a little bit, but let's focus on Mary Sue now. Let's take a good, long look at the feminist, SJW-related, because I'm trying to be very charitable with the way that I describe the Mary Sue, and I'll just say that it's a feminist blog website. Now, I like to think that my subscriber base is fairly intelligent and has their feet planted firmly in reality in terms of what the facts are. So I'm going to make the assumption that you guys think that this modern, crazy, batshit insane feminism wave that we have going on now, the trigger warnings and the safe spaces and all this stuff, you are against. If not, well, don't worry, you won't be in the 4th grade forever. While a great portion of the article is like a review, it does get to a bit of stuff towards the end that I find absolutely ridiculous, starting here with this paragraph. However, the most significant problem with Mankind Divided's narrative is the way in which it fails to take a stand on very clear issues of moral principle. The big question looming over humanity in the game is whether or not the United Nations should pass the Human Restoration Act, a piece of legislation which would lead to the global segregation of augmented people. Some countries have already started relocating augmented people into ghettos, and those that remain in cities like Prague are now asked to show their papers, while cops can be heard talking openly about their desire to kill augs on sight. The game is explicit, even heavy-handed, in its attempts to link the oppression faced by augmented people in its fictional setting to the oppression and violence that some populations have faced in the 20th and 21st centuries. But these parallels are tremendously misguided for a number of reasons. Now, by reading the article, you can tell that there's an obvious tone a lot of the time, the way that the author sets up the entire premise of the underlying quote-unquote issues. So, when, for instance, Andy Chalk in that PC Gamer article says, systematic racism and abuse faced by African Americans, instantly you know that he's telling this with the narrative in his mind that these things actually exist. And it doesn't. But writing these articles with the complete and total belief that there's some white supremacy boogeyman out there trying to get you, and that you aren't really responsible for yourself, and that you're not really powerful enough to take control of your own life. One reason that I admire the group Hotep so much. Well, this attitude will affect the way that you frame everything in that article afterwards. Maybe I'm just not racist enough to go, oh, those poor black people when I play Deus Ex. Maybe it's like black people are human beings with agency and control over their lives or something. I don't know, that's just my impression of human beings, but what do I know? I'm white. The person who makes this article thinks that they are in the right. They think that they are the moral superior here. They think that these things are real, They think that white supremacy is something that happens. They are very pro-SJW. They're very pro-Black Lives Matter. It's obvious. Because they're not saying that the game is good because it takes a neutral stance and allows you to decide whether or not you're going to support the Augs in this way or another, or maybe with Purity First, or with humans in one way or another, or find this gray area in between and work your way there to control the story. No, 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 no. They literally fault the game for being neutral and allowing the player to choose. And that is a problem. Or at least it has the potential to be a problem if people don't feel like this in games. Let's take the game Fallout New Vegas by Obsidian and Bethesda. There are two factions in New Vegas that you can choose from, assuming you don't side with yourself. You have Caesar's Legion and you have the New California Republic. This game does a horrible, terrible job at presenting both of these choices in a neutral-ish way. The game paints Caesar's Legion as easily the morally reprehensible bad group. They are the evil faction. And the NCR, the New California Republic, they are the good guys. Even though they're not perfect, and the game tells you this many times, as if it's attempting to make this gray area, it is clear and obvious to almost everybody that the NCR is far, 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 far preferable to Caesar's Legion. Even though the game does many, many things well, and it is a fantastic video game, this aspect of the game is very bad, and I do not like it at all. There is a clear and obvious right answer if you're looking for a morally good playthrough. It's like the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel. The Enclave is obviously evil, and the Brotherhood of Steel is obviously good. Now, in Fallout 4, I will at least give them props for, Obsidian at least, for making it a little bit more of a grayer area, even though even in Fallout 4, the Railroad was the easily, without a doubt, morally superior group, and there was no question about it. In the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, you have the chance of choosing between the Stormcloaks or the Imperials, and while I think the Imperials are the moral superior of them, and while I think it's much better from a political perspective as well, in the fact that I think Ulfric Stormcloak, who is the leader of these Stormcloaks, would make an absolutely horrible, horrible, awful ruler, who used the power of the voice to kill the Emperor and seize control for himself and start a civil war in, like, the worst time possible. I mean, between him and Tullius, I think that I sided with the Empire. But I can at least entertain the notion that the Stormcloaks were the better of the two. But you can't do that in New Vegas. New Vegas makes it very clear there's an evil side, there's a good side. The more morally gray, the more neutral, alright, this story leads you, the harder it is to choose between the factions, the better. So if you have people like Austin Walker who would be theoretically in charge of games like these and their direction that they would take, or the writer of the Mary Sue article, then would it really be so much of a choice for the player? If Deus Ex Mankind Divided portrayed Augs as Black Lives Matter, and they sympathized with them incredibly, and the designer was a sympathizer of the Black Lives Matter movement, then don't you think that would affect the way in which these groups are shown in the game? An attempt to persuade you to make a choice with one group over another? But the article says that the game is explicit and heavy-handed in its attempts to link the oppression faced by Augs and populations in the 20th and 21st centuries in real life. They say the parallels are tremendously misguided, so let's see why. A later paragraph states, emblematic of the game's unwillingness to take a stand is the way it positions a group called ARC, or the Augmented Rights Coalition. Posters in the game that includes the words Augmented Lives Matter explicitly link ARC to the contemporary American civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter, which arose in a response to a very real, widespread, systematic dehumanization and murder of black people by police. Because to the author, I guess we just can't let statistics and facts get in the way of our narrative, because that'd be racist. So they make it pretty clear that the author of this article, very, very much in support of Black Lives Matter. Now, Andre Vu, he claimed that the development of this game stretches back to before the Black Lives Matter movement was started, and he's very correct. And he asserts that the use of the phrase Augs Lives Matter was created as a concept before Black Lives Matter was created in real life. And there's a very real possibility that's true, but there's no way to really verify this. I have no reason to disbelieve him or believe him, but it doesn't make any sense to me like they would want to stoke all these fires, obviously, and then say we didn't want to. I'm inclined to believe that Black Lives Matter came after Augs Lives Matter. But with that aside, the article goes on. It is simply outrageous for Mankind Divided to appropriate the language of this vital and necessary social justice movement for its own narrative, which has no moral backbone whatsoever, and to apply that language to a fictional organization that, like everything else in the world of Deus Ex, is neither just nor unjust, but resides somewhere in between. Because it's almost like it's a video game or something. I'll continue with the next paragraph and then we'll tackle this idiocy. ARC presents itself as an organization that strives to push back against systematic oppression and assert the basic human rights of augmented people. But is ARC really a non-violent human rights group, or is it a terrorist organization? Of course, in Deus Ex, it's both or neither. The game raises real-world issues about which there are very clear things to say, and then it refuses to say anything about them. It has to take place in an entire world of moral ambiguity, where everything is painted in shades of gray, where the oppressors and the oppressed are all bad and neither side is entirely right or wrong. So the author, Carolyn Pettit, and I think this is the only article she even has on the site. Let us count our blessings. From her point of view as someone who supports Black Lives Matter, someone who is entirely and 100% convinced that Black Lives Matter is justified and it is a moral force of pure good in the world. An absolutely ridiculous notion to even entertain. Well, I won't say not to entertain, but to believe. But when we look at someone who has this point of view, who says that ARC in Deus Ex is the mirror of Black Lives Matter, except in the game, Black Lives Matter's mirror is not completely portrayed as the force of justice and good. To her, this is a problem with Deus Ex Mankind Divided. She has drawn the parallel that ARC is Black Lives Matter, that the developers of this game, who aren't even American, I might add, who don't care about our little storm in a teacup that is Black Lives Matter, they believe that the developers, they believe it's their moral duty, and that it's a problem that they do not prop up this mirror to Black Lives Matter in Deus Ex as the force of justice and good. To her, the idea that this game goes in the middle and lets players decide is bad. Players should not be allowed to decide in video games who is good and who is evil. Players should not be given the freedom to make that moral choice. To her, it is the oppressed that are always in the right, and it is the oppressors who are always in the wrong. There is no gray area. There is no spectrum of morality. There is good and there is evil, and Black Lives Matter is completely good, and the oppressors in the game and this boogeyman specter of white supremacy, it all ties together, and these things are evil. And even portrayals in a game that could supposedly be Black Lives Matter, which I'm not even willing to buy, must be done with a completely 100% total sympathetic view. She is advocating, she is telling you that one of the biggest problems with Deus Ex Mankind Divided is that it does not look you straight in the face and hold you by the hand and point to a group and say, they are good, side with them, because they are good and they do no wrong. You must assist them, because they, in my mind, represent a movement that I support. They must be the side that you support. Because if you don't, you're a racist, you're a bigot, you're a homophobe, any of these names that she's sure to call you, and I know the type, she's sure to call you. I don't know if Carolyn Pettit is black, white, it doesn't matter. Race doesn't matter in things like this. That's why I don't even bother to check. It doesn't matter. It's the things that she says and the things that she tells us in this article that are the window to her character. Imagine in Skyrim The game explicitly telling you that the Stormcloak rebels were in the right, the total right, and there would be no negative consequences to them beating the Empire. Imagine a game like in Fallout 4 where they said the Brotherhood of Steel is the force of good. They don't discriminate, they don't hate, there's nothing wrong at all with anything the Brotherhood of Steel does. They are knights of justice. They are here to uphold law and fairness and equality. And if you side with the Railroad, if you side with the Institute, you are making a completely morally reprehensible decision. Let us consider. Think back in your head, every game where you had to choose between not even two factions, but perhaps two people. If the game explicitly told you that one was the moral superior to the other. If the personal opinions of the developers made sure that they showed in the game. That whoever the developer, or the gameplay designer, or the story director, whatever they thought was so obvious and palpable in the game that it influenced your decisions to an immense degree. A lot of you are thinking right now, it is obvious from a gameplay perspective, since you are in control of the character who is central to the story, that you should be able to make those decisions, that having moral grays is good for you as a player because it will require you to choose and to think about which, in your mind, is the better choice. You are correct. Obviously, this is best for gaming. It's best for the players of the games. Just like how weapons and shooters should be balanced, just how class abilities should be balanced, just like maps should be balanced, so too should games of this nature have a moral balance to them. If answers to these questions are obvious, why give us the choice? Why try to dress up the story at all? Just make it like Doom, where you have evil hellspawn coming to destroy the world, fighting against the Star Wars Rebel Alliance, who really are a force for good fighting against a truly evil force. But in closing, let me leave you with a few thoughts. Carolyn Pettit didn't understand this, and she didn't notice it. Of course not. She has her blinders on. Her lens is affixed to her eyes. She sees the world through that point of view and nothing else. Same thing with Manveer and Tariq and everyone else. What does Deus Ex mean? Deus Ex comes from the Latin phrase Deus Ex Machina, which means God from the machine. God from the machine, if you look it up, means an unexpected power or event, saving a seamlessly hopeless situation, especially as a contrived plot device in a play or a novel. For instance, the bomber strike at the end of Saving Private Ryan, as an example. In ancient Greek plays, this would be about a god descending down to wrap things up at the end of a tragedy or a play. Thus the phrasing, God from the machine. Have you ever wondered why these games in the series are called Deus Ex Machina? Do you wonder why that's the title, Deus Ex? It's because the Deus Ex Machina is you. The whole point is that you, as the player, are the Deus Ex Machina who has to decide who wins. Were Carolyn Pettit to get her way, were all these people to get their way and truly control the narratives of this game, they would make even the title obsolete in a very real way.